President of the United States will make history today. It's not just the extraordinary nature of this presidency, but that he's pushing for changes that are both dramatic and controversial.
Opportunities like this come around maybe once in a generation.
He'll meet with heads of state, members of Congress, and speak to crowds of thousands, making decisions that affect millions here and around the world. Capturing every moment is his chief photographer, Pete Souza.
I think creating a good photographic archive for history is the most important part of my job, creating this archive that will live on.
Now we follow President Obama's photographer in his pursuit of history, meeting those who came before him as they recorded the everyday grit of the American presidency. For 50 years, presidential photographers have covered it all: upheaval, tragedy, and joy. Often developing friendships with the presidents they serve.
I think at this point, Pete and I are like an old couple. We sort of know each other, and he's like a member of the family.
For Pete Souza, there's no such thing as a typical day. He works in the West Wing, only steps from the Oval Office. In an average week, Souza will cover the president doing everything, from events on the South Lawn, to speaking at a massive rally, to meeting with the head of state. Today, President Obama will meet with the Prime Minister of Canada. Souza's job is to cover moments we would never see, whether mundane or monumental. His schedule is the president's schedule.
Right now, the schedule looks like it's not too crammed, but then you never know what's going to happen.
Right now, he's headed to the map room on the ground floor of the mansion. 65 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt fought World War II from this room. Today, it's where the President and First Lady wait before an event on the South Lawn. They're joined by Olympic gold medalists Jackie Joyner-Kersee, April Holmes, and others in a celebration of the U.S. Summer Olympic team.
What's so hard about y'all?
This job is all about access and trust. And if you have both of those, hopefully you're going to make interesting, historic pictures. I think trust began when I covered him for the Chicago Tribune. I spent a lot of time with him during his freshman year in the Senate. And I think both he and Robert Gibbs learned that they could trust me and that they let me photograph in behind-the-scenes situations. Also, anything that I overheard, I didn't share that with the reporter.
It is actually a very difficult thing for anybody who occupies this office to be under that kind of constant observation. It's one of the hardest things to get used to in being president. But when you have somebody like Pete Souza, who you trust, who's a friend, and who is able to purposely fade into the background so that at a certain point you don't notice he's there, then it makes it a little bit easier. Outstanding. So where do you keep your silver medal?
In a soft drawer right now, because we bring it out to the schools and stuff.
Come on.
So it travels a lot. We bring it out to the kids.
Even as one event ends, the President's Secretary of State arrives for another. In moments, they will welcome Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper. That means Pete will work with his Canadian counterpart, the Prime Minister's photographer, Jason Ransom.
How you doing, man? Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
How you doing? Good to see you again. Yep.
We met.
So you're going to shoot.
I'm gonna shoot this arrival of our guy.
Okay.
I'm hiding this. Okay.
Yeah. And then I'll grab you.
Before the meetings begin,
Here we go.
Pete gives Jason a tour.
This is the gallery.
The West Wing is decorated with a series of Pete's photos.
This is one that I just shot where Sasha was sneaking up on him at the end of one day that I sort of like. And then if you come down...
These behind-the-scenes images reveal a glimpse of the president's life that few outside the White House ever get to see.
Everybody enjoys Pete's pictures. The one that is my absolute favorite, though, is the one that Pete took of me blocking Reggie Love's shot playing basketball, which we left up there, I think, a little longer than usual.
Reggie Love is the president's personal aide. He's also a former college basketball star.
Usually there's a rotation, but through a presidential directive, I think that stayed up for 2 or 3 months.
Pete's office used to be the White House barbershop, a place where presidents could get a trim while doing a little business. Today, all that's left is the mirror.
I feel nervous staying down here too long, so let's go back up. I don't ever want to be in my office when, when I should be hanging outside the Oval in case that meeting breaks up.
Even though Pete's desk is fewer than 100 steps from the Oval Office, he's most comfortable when he hovers closer.
There's Mr. Burton.
Pete, hello.
All-time basketball player.
Just outside the president's office is a waiting area,
Oh, yes, there is.
the on-deck circle for the Oval Office. For Pete, it's also a kind of second office.
Oh, I said that this is a big part of the job, just kind of hanging out, reading.
Minutes later, Pete and Jason head in to cover the private meeting. On any given day at the White House, a number of events are unfolding at the same time. In the diplomatic reception room, First Lady Michelle Obama is greeting guests who will attend a breast cancer awareness speech. White House photographer Samantha Appleton is part of Pete Souza's team, one of 3 staff photographers. Appleton primarily covers the First Lady.
You know, I think we're both learning. I've never done anything quite like this, and she's never had a photographer trailing her all the time.
Jake, Rebecca, and Shelby.
People feel an intimacy with her. She's very approachable in that way, and she's a big hugger. That how people reach out to her in a physical way.
During the Prime Minister's visit outside the Oval Office, an international collection of photographers and reporters are waiting for a quick photo op with the 2 leaders. Another photographer on Souza's staff, Lawrence Jackson, will lead the press pool in.
We're walking around. We're about to go in.
Jackson used to work as an Associated Press wire photographer, whose goal was getting tomorrow's front page shot as quickly as possible. Now, Like his boss, Pete Souza, he's making images for history.
It's a different beast. Here, you know, you have time to work on assignment. You have time to get the best product out.
Jackson is a keen observer of how you do that, and one of the best at it is Souza.
Pete's secret is he's, I think, the most competitive guy in the room. He really wants to get the best shot. If he's working in his mode, he doesn't see anything else in the room except for what he's trying to do.
Thanks, guys.
Pete is trying to create the best possible photographic archive of the Obama presidency, a record for the ages. The idea of shooting for history took hold almost 50 years ago, when President Lyndon Johnson hired the first official presidential photographer. Yoichi Okamoto, known as Oki, set the gold standard for presidential photography, and he did it on the strength of his unique access.
Oki didn't work for anyone except the president. He was able to walk into the Oval Office when he thought or knew something was going on and begin photographing. And he would stay as long as he wanted.
Okamoto's images put viewers in the room as moments critical to the country and the world unfolded.
But I think just because of the character that LBJ was, that I don't know that there'll ever be another set of pictures like his.
Expressive, domineering, and oblivious to the camera, LBJ was the ultimate presidential subject. Though his dog Yuki often stole the show.
Yuki was this sort of white mutt whom I think knew that it was the president's dog. And that was the one that Johnson, when he would want to entertain folks that were in the Oval Office, he would start howling, and Yuki would then start howling. And the first time it happened, the agent outside the door almost busted in with his gun drawn, because he imagined the president was writhing on the floor of the Oval Office, and he was just howling with the dog.
The Obama's pup, Bo, is the newest first dog. His access to the Oval Office might even be better than Pete's. Along with helping to manage the president's schedule, Brian Mosteller also keeps his drawer stocked with Bo's toys.
That's the longest spot I've found you can throw something.
We got work to do. We gotta get back to work.
Right now, the president's work is going by motorcade to a rally at the University of Maryland. To a documentary photographer, every presidency has defining stories, and those images are often how we remember a president. For Johnson, it was civil rights in Vietnam. Reagan is forever tied to the end of the Cold War. Clinton had Middle East peace. History has yet to define the Obama administration. Today, he's pursuing a major legislative goal, healthcare reform. With the first vote on the healthcare bill expected in the next 2 months, the president is already working the phones.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
You know, some of you remember during the campaign, we had a slogan, fired up. There we go. Not everybody here knows how this story came about. So I'm going to tell it again.
A fired up story. This will get the crowd going.
Because it bears on healthcare reform.
Pete has covered hundreds of the president's speeches, so the challenge is keeping it fresh.
You know, in a lot of ways, the faces of these people really tell the story. And I think it tells you more about him than a picture of him at the podium.
And if a voice can change a room, it can change a city. And if it can change a city, it can change a state. can change a state, it can change a nation. If it can change a nation, it can change the world. So I want to know, are you fired up? Ready to go? Fired up? Ready to go? Fired up? Ready to go? Let's go change the world. Thank you, everybody.
Today, President Obama is heading to New York City to make a speech on Wall Street. And if the president is flying to New York, so is Pete Souza. Few Americans ever get to ride on Air Force One, but Pete is one of its most frequent flyers. This is actually his second tour of duty. Pete also served as a presidential photographer during the Reagan administration in the 1980s. Air Force One has a crew of 26 and space for 76 passengers. Secret Service, military, press corps, senior staff, medical crew, and guests of the president. Pete always has the same reserved seat. And like most staffers, is on the plane before the president's helicopter has even left the White House.
Attention on board the aircraft. The president has departed with a 10-minute flight time.
Pete has already made more than 150 trips on Air Force One and knows nearly every centimeter of the plane.
So this is the conference room. And anytime the president's going to have a meeting with some of his aides, this is usually where they meet. So this is the guest cabin. On the flight back, you'll see probably all the congressmen from New York will be on this flight. And then we'll go back. This is all the press pool, where the press pool sits. So they should be boarding the plane momentarily.
A few minutes later, Marine One arrives. The president is the last to board, except, of course, for Pete. For Souza, Air Force One is the ultimate backdrop to the president's story. But for one presidential photographer on September 11th, 2001, the plane became an essential part of the story.
9/11 is a good example of why there's a White House photographer around. I'd gone to the classroom to talk about reading, and Andy Card came in and whispered in my ear, "A second plane has hit the World Trade Center. America's under attack."
And at that moment, I knew it was going to be a very historic day. I tried to document every moment of that day.
Within the hour, the Secret Service evacuated the president to Air Force One.
There were some days where I truly felt invisible, just a handful of days during my 8 years, and that was a day that I truly felt invisible. I could stand just inches from the president and make pictures, and he would look right through me. It was almost like I wasn't even there. Those first few moments on the plane were very intense because it was all about the physical safety of the president. The eeriest moment was when the president stepped out of the cabin and he said, "I heard that Angel is the next target."
There was a caller that called in with the Air Force One's code name, Angel. He said, "Angel is next." And so at this point in time, people were taking every threat incredibly seriously.
It, to me personally, was like documenting a nightmare.
Covering the crisis left Draper little time to process what had happened. For him, the camera served as a kind of shield, absorbing emotion so he didn't have to.
I don't think I really digested in my mind everything. I think a lot of times using the camera as a distraction worked for me.
About 8 years later, President Obama arrives at New York's JFK Airport and boards Marine One for the trip into Manhattan. Staff, press, and an elite Secret Service team will follow in 3 other choppers. The convoy of helicopters reaches lower Manhattan in about 15 minutes. From here, the president will go to the financial district by motorcade. He'll travel inside his state-of-the-art limousine, known as the Beast. Though Secret Service is not at liberty to disclose the limo's security measures, it's safe to say that while it looks like a Cadillac, it's really a kind of shiny tank. The trip to Federal Hall, only a few blocks away, has taken weeks to plan. It involves hundreds of police officers and Secret Service agents, alternate routes, and contingency plans. Pete often rides in the spare limo, right near the president. But when he rides several cars back, like today, he has to run or risk missing a shot.
Part of my job is, in addition to doing the historical documentation, is doing the handshake photos. So, for instance, the president goes to New York on a trip. There's always greeters at every event that he goes to, and those pictures are really important to the people in the pictures. And so you want to make sure you get those in focus, well exposed, and that memento for them is a big deal.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of the roughly 8,000 to 20,000 photos Pete and his staff make each week, as many as 5% are greeting shots.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Okay, right here, sir.
So many people help the White House on trips like these. Offering them a photograph is a way of saying thanks.
Oh, gonna switch cameras here. Oh, sorry about that, sir.
All right?
Yep, just gonna switch. I took too many pictures of the speech. He caught me in an embarrassing moment where it's like that never happens to me. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that was a little embarrassing. Right?
Man, I tell you.
National Geographic, and suddenly, so the camera broke down. Golly.
I filled the disc.
He's usually much better than this, I promise.
Remember, you got to take the lens cap off.
No, it wasn't
the
the
lens cap is important.
No. It was I filled the disc. I mean, the speech was so exciting that I filled the disc with.
All right, are we ready up?
Before heading back to Washington, the president's meeting former President Clinton for lunch in Greenwich Village. The group that travels with the president spends so much time together, they've become like family.
I think the great thing about this administration is all these people that go on all these trips, everybody gets along. I was going to ride in spare.
In fact, they show their love by mercilessly kidding Pete.
They love him in New York.
box. It's crazy.
You see all these
I love them
cameras?
everywhere.
That's why they bring their cameras out.
Can you imagine if we announced where we were going?
Who
Let's not announce lunch.
The cheer for Pete Souza. I love Pete Souza.
Trip director Marvin Nicholson and press secretary Robert Gibbs seldom miss an opportunity to rib him.
Whenever we travel with Pete, it's always like this. It's really weird. You see all the bike rack up to make sure that people don't rush the van just to try to touch Pete.
Oh, God.
What's that sign say? I love Pete. Nice.
Yes, Pete can.
Yes, Pete can. Get up.
For the president, the lunch with former President Clinton will be a chance to talk with one of the few people who understand the pressures that come with this office. Powerful candidates are, by definition, revealing. They give us hints about inner workings, but leave room for imagination about who the subject is or how they're motivated.
A still photograph is extraordinarily powerful. The amount of information that can be in it, the way it can connect to the individual viewer. My approach to the whole thing was to not intrude on the history, to capture it in a way that people could have a sense, and not to feel that it was being manipulated. It wasn't posed, it was natural and candid.
During the Clinton administration, candid images were shot on film. Today, Pete shoots only digital. Pete and his team produce between 20 and 80,000 photos each month. White House photo editor Alice Gabriner looks at every single one.
We care about creating this serious documentary archive. We have the opportunity to create, if we want to, the best archive of any president that's ever existed.
Gabriner sets aside the best images, uploading some to the web. But by law, all are part of the National Archives, and none can be deleted from the collection. When a president leaves office, his presidential library becomes the repository of all the images, whether greeting shots or even more historic ones. Pete and his 3 staff photographers create dozens of official portraits each year. But the one that requires the most forethought is the president's cabinet photo.
It's one of the things that the cabinet loves to have. You also get a cabinet photo, and every member of the cabinet signs each other's photos. It's a little bit like a high school yearbook.
Pete tasked one of his staff photographers, Chuck Kennedy, with making the image.
Usually, as photographers, we're stepping into an event somebody else has created, and in this case, we had to build it from the ground up.
We kind of scrambled around and got everybody from a groundskeeper, some of the household staff.
Our best friends became the kitchen staff. We could call them and they could grab like 12 people really readily and pose for a minute and pretend to be the Secretary of State or whoever.
Though they'd practiced several times with their stand-ins, there would be only one chance to get the real thing.
Mr. President, you're by Rom. You're next to Rom, the Vice President, next to Secretary of
And so we kind of got everybody into place. We took a lot of photos.
When the president, after 12 or 15 or 20 frames or however many I shot, goes, okay, one of those must have worked, you're just hoping that nobody blinked.
After months of debate, the president's health care reform bill is finally up for a vote in the House of Representatives. Pete has just spent an hour covering the president as he urged members to support it. Now, he'll appeal directly to the American people.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just came from the Hill where I talked to the members of Congress there, and I reminded them that opportunities like this come around maybe once in a generation. Most public servants pass through their...
Later that night, the House does pass the bill, but by a thin margin. In a month, if the Senate passes its version, Pete's story and the president's may have a dramatic ending. In the evenings, the president is as likely to be following a vote in the Capitol as he is attending a political dinner. And tonight, it's the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Gala. For Pete, it's another 13-hour day.
We can go till 10 o'clock. I am so lucky to be doing this. It's been just a great opportunity to document history. I feel just so fortunate, but it's a grind. This job is a grind. And I'm sure if you talk to other White House staff people, they would say the same thing.
All right, let's go.
Like most White House staff, balancing life outside of work is a challenge.
The thing that's the hardest for me is keeping up with friends. And I'm sure my friends think I've abandoned them, but you know, if you wait, you know, another 3 years, I'll get back to you for sure.
A motorcade has a certain glamour to it. But the realities of security mean that the president and first lady often arrive in some of the least glamorous parts of a building. Still, Pete took one of his most memorable and revealing shots the night of the inauguration on this same freight elevator. These personal pictures reflect the depth of Pete's relationship with the president and first lady.
I'm not sure how I would describe my relationship with the president. So I would say that he would call me a friend, and I would say that our friendship is based more on a professional relationship.
Well, Pete and I are friends at this point. I mean, we know each other. He's seen me on difficult days. He's seen me on happy days. He has gone with us when my family takes trips, and has gotten to know Michelle and the girls. There's nothing that Pete would do that in any way I would be worried about, and I think he feels the same way that I've got his back. And so Pete really does feel like part of the family.
It's that kind of intimacy that allows for memorable images. President George H.W. Bush's photographer, Dave Valdez, developed a similar kind of closeness with the Bush family. First, when Bush was vice president, and later, when he was elected president.
Well, strong personal relationship that grew in, as far as I'm concerned, to a real friendship. He integrated in there with our family, and they all loved him.
One of my favorite photos, I was up there one summer and took a photo of them, he and Barbara Bush, with their grandchildren in bed.
And it wasn't staged, there wasn't anything, oh, let's just show that we're a good family or show that we love the grandkid. It was just a moment that David captured. He saw him running around and just took some shots. I think that's why his work, at least why Barbara and I loved it, it brought out what was natural, what we were about, what we thought, what we cared about, what we cried about, what we laughed about. And he did it all with feeling for the family.
After his speech at the Hispanic Caucus Gala, the president and Pete are on the final handshakes of a long day.
I don't think he's going to work a rope line, but he might. We're just going to... He's going to do it.
I don't know how he does it. I mean, I have it fairly easy because okay, all I have to do is follow him and take pictures, and he has to be alert and coherent and articulate and engaged all the time.
Months later, as the holiday season arrives, there's a party atmosphere at the White House. But even as Pete covers the holidays, he follows the president as he reckons with weightier events. His health care bill has run into serious obstacles in the Senate. He faces the most profound economic crisis since the Great Depression. And each day, he must confront the reality of sending young men and women into battle. When the president visited Dover Air Force Base to pay his respects to the families of fallen American soldiers, it left an indelible mark on the president and on Pete.
At one point, the president, only with his military aide and myself, walked on the plane where the caskets were. And I'm going to start getting teary-eyed because that was, something that I had never documented and certainly something that he had never done before. And I could tell that it really affected him in a very emotional way. To me, it was a private moment. I wanted to document it for history, but I didn't want to affect the scene for him.
After the holidays, he's battling on all fronts. But his fight for health care reform has been dealt what some consider a fatal blow.
This is a big news because at stake right now, health care reform and a lot of other stuff.
An underdog Republican wins a special election for Senator Kennedy's seat in Massachusetts.
This is very significant for the president and Democrats on so many issues.
Now, Senate Democrats no longer have the supermajority. And that means the president's entire legislative agenda is in serious trouble.
The Massachusetts vote kind of came out of nowhere. I don't think people expected it. So I think it was something that was just not on anybody's radar.
The president's focus now shifts to the upcoming State of the Union speech. He'll talk about the economy, about the wars, and he'll also make one last appeal for health care reform. Pete's coverage of the healthcare saga is about to reach a climactic moment. So he concentrates on getting details that tell the story. One involves preparation for the upcoming speech that the president has been laboring over with speechwriter Jon Favreau.
I was making final edits to the speech, and I got an email from Katie Johnson that just said, POTUS incoming. And I'm sitting down here, and I look up, I have no idea what that means, and the president walks into the office with Pete behind him with the camera, and he's like, hey, I just wanted to make sure you could read my writing on a few of these edits, so.
I think people's favorite pictures is me going over a speech with my speechwriter, Jon Favreau, and my scrawl all over the place, and it's just a picture of the page, and that's something that you take for granted, but when it's suddenly blown up, you realize that sends to the public, I think, a sense of what the day-to-day activities of the White House are really like.
On the night of the address, only minutes before they have to leave for the Capitol, the president and Favreau are in the map room, making final edits.
As usual, we're very last minute. We tried to get everything done as far in advance as possible this time, but last minute edits come in from 50 different people on the final day of a speech, and to add to all of that craziness, my laptop crashed for about 20 minutes right before he needed to go over there. So I had to run back here, make edits on this computer, run back over there. It was pretty crazy.
Go load. Run. We're leaving.
In a holding room at the Capitol, the president waits with members of Congress, describing what it's like to walk into the chamber as president.
The first time when you walk through those doors and the sergeant says, you know, that first time gets you. By the second time, you're all right. We just brokered a healthcare deal right here.
Mr. President, we're ready to load it up, sir.
All right. So how do we do this?
You're first, and then leadership.
Photographers. All right.
Madam Speaker, the President of the United States.
Here's what I ask Congress, though. Don't walk away from reform. Not now. Not when we are so close. Let us find a way to come together and finish the job for the American people. Let's get it done. Let's get it done.
These defining images, captured at times of great importance, are at the core of why we value presidential photographers. They are there at transformative moments to see and record what we often cannot. But not every president saw the value of this type of coverage, with serious costs to history. President Nixon severely restricted the access of his chief photographer, Ollie Atkins. On the night of his resignation speech to the nation, before the television broadcast began, the president had his ultimate and most revealing exchange with Atkins.
The lights go out. Ollie? No, only the CBS crew now is to be in this room during this. Only the crew. No, there will be no picture. No, after the broadcast. You've taken your picture. Didn't you take one just now? That's it.
The following day, David Hume Kinnerly, who would become President Ford's photographer, caught the moments just after Nixon resigned.
One of the most profound moments I think I've ever photographed was the first frame where he looked up at the White House. Well, I can't imagine what was going through his mind at that moment.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
Gerald Ford assumed the presidency at a time when public distrust of the White House ran deep. He chose Kennerly to be his photographer in part to help open up the White House. Many photographers get close to the president and first family, but David Kinnerly's relationship was unique.
They treated me like a member of the family. I don't know how else to put it. Some of the best pictures I took, for instance, Mrs. Ford looking out of the window in her bathrobe from behind. She looks like she's in a bird cage almost. It was taken when she didn't even know I was in the room. But at the end of every day, President Ford almost always invited me to come up and have a drink, with him and Mrs. Ford, and I was the only one.
The most compelling evidence of Pete's access is hung on the walls of the West Wing. Every couple weeks, Pete and his team bring in new pictures, called jumbos, to keep up with the evolving story of the administration.
I would say changing of the pictures is one of the biggest events that happens around here that everybody loves. There's no question about it.
What do I think of Pete's photos? They're magnificent. Every single day I stop and look at them. He manages to capture the best expressions on people's faces and tells a story.
When Pete changes them, you can't walk through because all the staff is watching and looking for the new pictures. It is amazing. It's nice for the staff that don't get to spend a lot of FaceTime with the president to sort of see what he does. Did he flip through these?
Sometimes even the president takes a sneak preview of the newest editions.
Sam and I just walked.
He was down here flipping through the photos.
He was whistling. He's whistling, and he goes, "I love looking at these new jumbos."
Pete took a wonderful picture. It's a very simple picture of a little boy who came in with his family. And he was the son of somebody who works at the White House. He couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years old. And he very boldly told me that people had told him that he and I had the same haircut. And so he wanted to see if that was true. So I put down my head so that he could examine my hair. And he helpfully pointed out all the gray hairs. And then he decided to pat me on the head just to get a feel for it. And Pete took a picture, and I think that one has stayed up through the whole year and a half, just because it reminds you not to take yourself too seriously. If, a 3-year-old can pat you on the head in the Oval Office, then you're probably keeping your sense of humor.
16 months into his term, Pete and his team have made nearly 1 million photographs, 30,000 of the grueling healthcare fight alone. They record the gritty work of building a consensus, the dozens of town hall meetings, and the hundreds of conversations with congressmen and senators. But by late March, after all that, there is still one more vote and a few more pictures that will tell the final story. In the 3 days leading up to the vote, it'll be a full court press to persuade the remaining handful of legislators. Pete will get it all.
I took this job for those last 3 days. You really felt that you were documenting history. I remember the incessant number of phone calls by him, calling individual congressmen. And he used like the Oval Office phone, he used Katie Johnson's phone, and he used Rom's cell phone. It's like in the limo making calls.
By 10 p.m. on the night of the vote, the president has no more calls to make. All he can do is wait.
But then when they started roll call for the vote, he wanted to be with the staff. And everybody had gathered in the Roosevelt room.
At 10:48 p.m., the final tally for the healthcare reform bill is in.
On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 211. The bill is passed.
I think that's when it really hit people how historic this was. Here's something they had worked for basically since day one of his presidency.
After the vote, the president invited his staff up to the White House residence to celebrate.
And we went up on the Truman balcony and toasted all these 25-year-olds and a bunch of people who had worked so hard in relative obscurity to make this thing happen. It was one of those moments that that reminds you of why you got into politics in the first place. The healthcare vote was probably the most gratifying moment that I've had in public life, more than my election as president, because you run and hopefully win elected office, not just for the sake of being something, but for the sake of doing something.
Pete seems to be driven by the same idea.
I feel like I'm the luckiest SOB photographer in the world, and I'm not going to let these years go by without making the most of it.
Walk up the ramp.
People always ask me, "What's your favorite picture?" And I always say it's the one that I'll make tomorrow.
There will be many stories written about the Obama years. But Pete Souza's pictures will give the American public an inner glimpse of what happened here, of what jubilation and defeat felt like, of the texture of days, intense and tranquil, of life in this rarefied place called the White House.